Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. This is Cory from CoryBakerFilmmaker.com, and I just saw Cats, written by Lee Hall and Tom Hooper, original poetry from T.S. Eliot, musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and directed by Tom Hooper. I saw this movie at the AMC Burbank 16, and for every 10 times that I see a movie at a theater, I do a little featurette on it. So now it's time for the AMC Burbank featurette, a little bit later than I had hoped, but hopefully worth the interesting little bit. So let's roll that now.
Burbank, the media capital of the world. Home of Disney, Universal, and Warner Brothers, amongst many other studios. It's also home to one of the finest movie theaters in the world, the AMC Burbank 16. Inside, it has screens for Dolby Cinema, the most advanced projection in the world, with immersive audio and incredible picture, with blacks so dark they let you know the projector is still on before you start the movie. In addition, a laser projected IMAX screen in an AMC Prime theater with 3D capability throughout its 16 screens. Each house filled with comfortable recliners and a bar in the lobby for drinks before and after your movie. It also allows for mobile ticketing and ordering, as well as providing far beyond the standard movie theater fare. So that's it? Media capital of the world has an amazing movie theater? Well, it's how we got here. That's the most interesting part of all. One of the first multiplexes in Los Angeles was the AMC Burbank 10, originally built across the street from where the AMC 16 would end up. It was a state-of-the-art venue, the jewel of any suburban standalone multiplex. But 5 years later, in the mall across the street, opened the AMC Burbank Town Center 8. 3 years later, in the same exact complex, they opened the AMC Burbank Town Center 6. They actually built the three of them together, including the expansion of the Burbank 10 to the Burbank 14 as the Burbank Media Center 28. Eventually, change came to the 14 as well, and so began the building of the current king of the hill, the AMC Burbank 16. Throughout the entire complex, it gives you the taste of a movie theater experience inside a mall, as an anchor store at a mall, and being a standalone building. So any of the people who work in the media capital of the world will know what it's like at the movie theater in the viewer's town, no matter what type of theater it may be. 4,200 seats over 16 screens. The AMC Burbank 16 is the flagship multiplex of the media capital of the world.
The plot of Cats, well, I mean, there's not really a plot to Cats. There's a bunch of cats who introduce themselves throughout the course of the movie. And there's a Jellicle ball at the end of this whole thing. So it's basically like American Idol for cats. And the winner gets to have a better life somehow, but they don't really specify how or by which means these cats have a better life. So up front, Cats is not a very good movie. I don't think you really need me to tell you this. Most people made up their minds on Cats probably when they saw the first trailer come out and saw like what the cats were actually going to look like. I imagine the rest of the people who might have somewhat been interested, once they heard the overwhelming critical hatred of the film, I think a lot of people backed off. Ancillary things like opening box office and stuff certainly didn't help this movie. I would say that one thing that I did like about the movie, even though it was probably my least favorite piece of the movie, is the fact that they stuck with the awful CG animation, because that was somebody's hill that they died on, and somebody really thought that was going to change this whole movie. I don't know if it's Tom Hooper, I don't know if it's somebody at Universal, I don't know where they made that decision, and then they said, no, this is going to work, we got to stick with it, even though people went out of their way to say how terrible it is. It's really tough to continue to live on that like in this small little like sometimes you have to just have these ideas and stick with them, and if you think it's best for the movie, then it's best for the movie. and you got to sort of tone out everybody who's trying to tell you differently. And even though everyone else would have been right when they said, don't do this awful CG cat thing, you got to stick it to whoever was like just dying on the hill, because that's a big decision to sort of put this whole movie behind. Personally speaking, I probably would have, if I was Universal, had gone along the same lines as the people in Sonic did, where the initial reaction to the CG was so awful that they realized that this movie was not going to do well if they continued to release it as it was. And they made this sort of unprecedented step of like redoing the entire movie from a CG aspect. I mean, you know, I never saw Cats, the play. I never heard anything that was any different than what I saw in the movie version, other than it's live theater, and that sort of gives you a different feeling of the performance that you're seeing. I mean, this movie doesn't really play well into a movie for me, mostly because if you're on a stage play, you have your seat, and your view is whatever you choose it to be. So if you're watching 15 cats dancing in a chorus line in front of you, you can choose what cat is like the most interesting for your vision, like what, or maybe you're trying to take in the whole thing. When you put it into a movie, a director and a DP are making those choices for you, and it's not quite the same thing as a live theater going experience. And I think that there's some moments where it really helps to have like the ability to like close in on one particular person. When Jennifer Hudson is doing Memories, for instance, like obviously we want to be like right in her face for that moment, and it works out really well. But I mean, I think that there were too many opportunities where they sort of thought like, oh, well, let's show this really interesting part, and it took away from a choreography that is meant to be enjoyed on like a larger scale, like where you can see everyone moving at the same time. It's not quite the same thing if you go see the Rockettes and you're just watching one Rockette kick as when you're watching all of them do it together in unison. And to have a close-up sort of takes away from your ability to enjoy the scope of what is going on in front of you. That being said, as far as it being a musical, I really didn't much care for the musical. I mean, Memories is a great song. I think that's the only one that really like made me feel like it was worth watching this thing. I can tell you immediately, just by watching the performances in this movie, which people have made money from music in their life and which ones haven't. Taylor Swift and Jason Derulo and Jennifer Hudson all have, you know, actual singing careers, and it shows when they sing their songs. Not that anybody who was from the actor side didn't do a good job. I thought overall everyone did a really great job as far as singing goes, but there's a shift between the people who are doing it on a professional level and those who aren't. Rebel Wilson doesn't look as good when she's put next to Jason Derulo because he does this for a living. And it just makes people look unmatched. And with sort of this cast, which at times felt like it was just sort of like pulled out of like a hat of names that could potentially be in this movie, it doesn't... I would have rather have probably stuck with more actual singers as like the people in the movie, even though I enjoyed sort of performances based off of the choices that some actors were making in the movie. For instance, Ian McKellen, for whatever reason, it just sort of avoids the same sort of ridicule in my mind's eye of the performance that he does, because his almost felt like it was coming from someplace. I mean, like they talked about how they had cat rehearsals before they started the movie to allow all the actors to sort of like come through with their inner cat. I felt like Ian McKellen was the only one who felt cat-like to me. Everyone else sort of felt like they were just sort of in the suit and not really like becoming a cat. I don't think that it's, you know, of utmost importance that everyone feels like a cat. It just sort of doesn't... You can tell people who are trying to put on something. And anytime somebody did something overtly cat-like, it got laughs from the audience. Now, I know I saw this movie like a week after it had been released and sort of panned universally, and there were a lot of people, I think, who were showing up for the train wreck, and they were laughing for that reason. Just to say that, like, anytime someone, like, sort of meows, it just felt awkward and forced, whereas Ian McKellen was doing these little tiny choices that sort of made it feel more like a cat when you call its name and it looks at you, but it doesn't direct its attention at you. It does that sort of acknowledgement of the fact that it was called, but it's not going to acknowledge the command. There was something about that in Ian McKellen's performance that I thought was really nice. To me, the biggest sin of this movie in regards to the CG animation is not sort of just the uncanny valley aspect of how it doesn't look realistic and your brain is playing tricks on you and it's making you think it's making you come from this unnatural place, is that I felt like it robbed all the choreography from being the best version of itself. Because when you're trying to CG animate cat hairs onto, the legs and bodies and torsos of dancing actors, there's no way to do that where it doesn't sort of take away the natural movement that were associated with dance away from the actors performing it or the dancers performing it. It doesn't work. It just feels like I'm watching a video game dance. And when I go to see a musical, I want to see the actual people dance. Like, part of the joy of watching people sing and dance on stage is to have the actual singing and the actual dancing. Now, you could tell that there was dancing that happened prior to the CG trying to clean up cat hairs and stuff like that. But at the end product made it worse. And thank God any kind of digital manipulation that was going on in this movie was so light that it wasn't interfering with your ability to, like, none of this seems like an auto-tuned affair. I'm sure there was a little bit of it going on to, like, clean up the edges, so to speak, but hardly noticeable, if at all. All in all, I think that nobody really does a terrible performance. Nobody really, like, blows it out of the water either. It's all very... It's a lot of people getting paid to do cats. I mean, it just sort of feels like that. I would have... There are people who certainly did better than others. I think Idris Elba did a great job. I think Ian McKellen, as noted, did a good job. I think Jennifer Hudson did a good job. They all earned their paycheck. I just don't know if the paycheck should have necessarily gone to them for this, because it wasn't as well conceived as it should have been. I don't like the thought of Idris Elba being off the shelf from being able to do some other movie because he's currently working on Cats, because that just doesn't seem like a good use of Idris Elba. He does fine in the movie, but it seems like a waste of having a good actor do something terrible. I would also say that the sexualization of the cats was very unnerving and bothersome. They kept Francesca Hayward, who is our lead cat in this whole thing, doing the Victoria role, is fine, but they just keep doing these same beauty shots they would do with an actress who's in, like, some sort of romantic comedy, and just sort of, like, making her do these turns into camera, and just the way they and giving Taylor Swift, like, humongous breasts as opposed to every other cat, even though cats don't have breasts. Like, it just seems like everything here was just misguided, and the awkwardness never overcame. Like, I never at any point stopped feeling awkward watching it, and I don't know. It's creepy in all the worst ways, and that is going to be trouble when you're trying to enjoy the movie if you can't get over the creepiness of it. One thing I did, like, keep coming back to in my mind with this whole thing is that there's no plot. There's no plot in this whole thing. And it made me, upon leaving, think a lot about Aquaman, which I had trashed previously, and was wondering in my head whether or not a no plot story is better than a story that has such an awfully designed plot. And I think that Despite the awful things about this movie, which are clear from anybody with eyes who sees it, there's a lot of things that are being done very well. And the fact that you have great crew, a great DP, great sound, great gaffer, the whole thing down the line, everyone did their job exactly the way they're supposed to. You can even argue that the CG people did their job exactly the way it was supposed to. It was just a bad decision. I would say that this movie felt a lot smoother and less awkward as far as a narrative is concerned, despite the fact that it doesn't have an overwhelming narrative, because it doesn't, at no point was I watching this and going like, what the fuck is going on? It didn't take me out of the place that we were in. If anything, it was just, again, horrible planning, where you have a cat who's like half the size of a car in one scene and then half the size of a can in another. There was too many things that would take you out of the movie. There's too many things where you see a beautiful woman's face behind a CG cat and you're just like, what the hell am I looking at? That make this awkward, but it's not. Weirdly enough, not having a plot, not having a story, made this almost easier to watch than something that was. This was a movie with an actual story and an actual, like, you got to follow along, like we're the first act, second act, third act sort of structure, and it was terrible. That would have made this movie a whole lot worse. And the fact that the plot is just sort of like ignored and there's no plot really to speak of makes it almost easier to watch than something like Aquaman, where it just is intentionally angering you several times throughout the course of the movie. I don't have 9 lives, but the leaderboard does. Once again, another one on the list for AMC Burbank 16. I hope you enjoyed the featurette. That will be shared as like a separate little thing as well. So if you liked it and you want to share it with others, that would be great. On to the movie leaderboard. So I brought it up there at the end. I had previously rated Aquaman a 2. That's the worst thing I've seen since I started doing these reviews. Surprisingly, I imagined that I would be just as angered and just as off with that movie as this movie as I was that one. But incredibly, I actually think Cats is a better movie than Aquaman. It's not as fun, like pointlessly fun as Aquaman could be at times, because there's action and explosions and pretty people to look at and stuff like that. But this one didn't go out of its way to try and anger me as much as Aquaman did. And I think that is the one saving grace about this movie. There's been a thing I've been seeing about how Cats might be this generation's Rocky Horror. And I don't like that, because I actually like Rocky Horror a lot. And I enjoy going to the midnight showings of Rocky Horror and stuff like that. But it's just so weird. It's not that it's bad because somebody couldn't be bothered. It's bad because people made decisions and they were bad decisions. And that doesn't make me feel like any kind of trust was violated the same sort of way that, like, you give a movie to somebody and you expect them to be able to follow sort of like linear. Honest to God, I think the saving grace of this movie, this whole Cats movie, is just no plot. Because it's awful. It's awful to follow something that doesn't have like a clear up and down, but it makes it so much easier to not get angered by the decisions being made, like sort of in that part of, like, a bad movie usually falls apart with a bad script. And this movie didn't fall apart with a bad script because the script didn't need to be good or bad. It just was irrelevant to the whole thing. But if I had to give Cats a rating, I would give it a 2.8. It's not good. I wouldn't recommend seeing it. I would not say spend money on it. If somebody gave you like a free screener, or, if you're at a friend's house and they're watching it, then that's fine. Feel free to check in, see what you think of your own. But it's really not worth seeing. And the decisions made were truly awful decisions. But in a weird place, I have a lot of respect for how they stood up for awful decisions. It for whatever reason, there's something admirable about a bad movie that came from bad choices that ends up being bad. At least they tried. I guess that's the very least you can say. At least they tried. Anywho, if you want more of me, you can go to my website, CoryBakerFilmmaker.com, Facebook.com/CoryBakerFilm, or at LegendsCB5 on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Lots of movies I want to see. Lots of good stuff out there. Definitely going to go see another movie for this week. Put out a review on Thursday. And yeah, that's about it right now. So if there's anything you guys want me to see, please just leave me a comment below. Like this video. Share it with people who might enjoy it. Yeah, that's it. So if you don't mind, I have to lap some milk out of a bowl because I find myself thirsty. And the Jellicle ball is tonight, and I need to rest up.